so supportive and such great partners that we had our duplicating office. Where are you, Eric Berkeley? Where's Eric Berkeley? We had our duplicating office today make you each your own copy. So when you have a chance and you want to dive through, although today, hopefully on some of the slides, I'll be able to say to you, table 8, take a look at this one. So here are copies that we made for each of you. How about Mr. Burns? All right, so I'll leave one there. And then, here are 5.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Did you run? Where did he go? You're back here. Did you run a copy for yourself yet?
No, I haven't.
Oh, you
Already took one.
You already took one off the file. I don't think I have extras. Not for you, Mr. Boucher. And these go on eBay for a pretty good price. So, what is the timing that you would like us to hit today that you would call perfect?
4:30.
All right, you're already going to get the laser right in the eye. All right,
Phil's not here. Somebody has to fill in for Phil.
Oh God, we have the problem child over here already identified. Could I seriously ask, so I know how fast to go or how not? When would you like
We
to
start
start?
at 5, right?
Good. We start.
Okay.
Do it in half an hour.
We can do it in a half an hour. Okay. Yes, we can. So again, I'm Joel, and this is Larry, and please feel free to interrupt us at any point in time if you want us to. We have the wireless keyboard sitting up here and the mouse, and we ought to know how to use it to be able to get the PowerPoint to be down. And I'll show you that, let's see if it really does work, that we have, oh, the desk works better than the glass. We have, no, I'm fine. We have over here, and I know this is really awful for you to look at, but what I want you to do is make you really nauseous right now. We have the whole report here. This is what I gave to you. So if there were something, for example, let me just randomly stop and hit, and it won't be all that perfectly random. Let me hit, no, I don't want to randomly hit there or there. Maybe I'll hit there. If I randomly hit right there, I want you to realize these are the results you're going to see later on when we ask the question about people's perception of what they support as best choices for Social Security funding for the future. Down here at the bottom in blue is a whole bunch of detail where we dig in on, do the genders differ, do the income levels differ, do the age groups differ in their attitude, and what Larry and I are saying is if there ever is a point that you want us to just do this and quickly toggle back and forth and dig more deeply, we'd be happy to. As we try to do each year, we try to treat this like a class that we teach, because first and foremost, we're both professors. And so anyways, I didn't introduce yet, speaking of my role as a professor, we have Cody Hooper here, and I think Cody might be from Mr. Lehman's district. He thought you remembered you. Is that true? Did I get that right, Cody? Cody is a fine young, and I know from class this morning, 24-year-old man from the Beaver Falls area who was a student of ours that Cody was involved in the interviewing and the data collection of this. And Cody, if I have my facts right, is also a wrestling coach at Beaver River. And if you have any question at any point in time, you might remember last year we brought really tall John and not quite as tall Lacey. And the year before we brought Emily Bush. And the year before, one year we had Alexis Saccone from Lowville. We always try to bring students over so that if you wanted somebody who tells the truth rather than he and I lying with statistics today, you can ask Cody. Plus I wanted Cody because he wants to be a math major, wants to be a research type of person. What they always see as the students is the development and the collection and the analysis, but they never see the talking with people like you. And I thought I'd bring Cody along to see it. So don't hesitate for a moment if you want to ask him a question. So as always, we start out with, this is what we do at the center. I think you're all familiar with us. We have a whole bunch of studies coming up where you'll probably get even more familiar with us in the media over the next couple of months. But that's the Jefferson County study that we do each year. In April, we collect the data. That's the St. Lawrence County. Every year, we collect the data in July, and yours is the one that we collect every year in October. And there I am, and there Larry is. And does anyone in the room know who he is? Boy, that would crush him right now. Is there anyone who knows that picture? Other than Eric, you better know who that is. He has a weird goatee going on in that picture that he doesn't also. If I could somehow delete that off of there. His name is Dr. Richard Help, and he was the original director of the Center for Community Studies when we started in 1999. And Dick has then left us and became the Cornell Cooperative Extension Director. That might be where some of you met him. He's still very active living in Syracuse as a consultant, but unfortunately he's in Florida right now, so he couldn't be here today. But as we decided this year to add some new survey questions, We got Dr. Halpin involved because my degree is in mathematics. His degrees are in statistics and mathematics. What we wanted is of someone whose PhD was in community building and sociology and political science. So we brought in an expert in crafting good questions. So he couldn't be here today. Wait till I tell him you didn't recognize him. So it's always our job, of course, to be very, very grateful to the Development Authority and the Northern New York Community Foundation and Car Freshener and our college that the students, when they work for us, they don't just volunteer, they get paid, they get fed. We have to buy the phone numbers that we use. We have to lease the call center, and there are expenses associated with this that we don't hand you folks an invoice. The college has decided, along with the generous contributions of these groups, that this is a good exercise for all of us involved to do. So today what we're going to do is talk to you briefly about what the study is, that's review from other years, how the study was done, very similar to other years, why it was done, very similar to other years, but we hope to spend the most of our time talking about this thing at the end. What did we find? And so very quickly, there are 9 sections of survey questions, and if you look here from 5 down, those are ones that come from you. We thank you so much each year that you gave us questions about public transportation to ask. You gave us questions about economic development and the Climax building. You gave us questions about, do the folks, your constituents, feel well informed? You gave us questions about, should the county treasurer be appointed or elected? Larry and I never would have thought of those questions. So what you have above that is these are the ones we've been tracking for 20 years in Jefferson County and 12 years now in your county. These are ones that are brand new. These are the ones that we added 11 questions that Dr. Halpin helped us craft. So that's what we are going to do, and in 45 minutes we can't hit every one of the questions. But what we did is pick the ones out of there today that we think are most interesting to us. So that's what it was. It was, again, telephone methodology in late October, as it is every year. Our sample size this year was 426. So what Larry and I would love to have you be thinking of every time you see a number for the next 40 minutes is basically plus or minus 4%. Plus or minus 4%. Plus or minus 4%. You are going to see that we asked a question about presidential approval. You are going to see that we asked a question about, do you think that President Trump has been good for, overall, do you think he's been good for our country or bad for our country? We wanted to find out what are the opinions in our county. And you will see that about 61% of the people, do you want to ask, do you think the majority was good or bad?
Good.
Good. And it was. In fact, I think if we came up with only 10% of the people we talked to said that they thought President Trump was good, you'd probably look at me and say, how the hell did you sample, Joel? But what I want you to do is this. I want you to be thinking 61% plus or minus 4. That's my point. My point is I can't guarantee if we talk to every one of you that it would be exactly 61%. But what I will tell you is I would be really shocked if we talked to everybody if it was more than 65 or less than 57. There. Stats 101. Right there coming at you, the idea of a margin of error. By the way, that's Tony. She was a great caller. That's in our call center. She has a laptop in front of her and a telephone and a headset on, and she's smiling all the time. So I'm going to hand it over to Larry for about the next 10 or 15 slides. Do you see I remembered to? Last year, I think I went about 3 slides too far.
You can get to it early.
There you go.
So I wasn't expecting to do this, but
I can do it if you want me to.
No, I'll do it. So again, the next thing, why do we do research? And Joel's kind of quoted the 8s here. So again, there are basically 5 reasons that you do research. Formulate, use it to plan. Advocate, what you want to do is you have something that you want to get your name out there and let people know you exist and this is what people actually want. A common reason that people use survey research is to evaluate, look at your processes as they are and see are you performing up to the standards that you set. Some of the secondary things, you educate. Either educate with the results that you get or during the process, a lot of times we'll see that through the idea of having a conversation with the people on the other side of the phone, you actually educate them about the issues that you're trying to get information about. And again, activating the idea of engaging people in the community to get them involved in different aspects of the community that they otherwise may not do. So again, one of the numbers, Joel gave you one about presidential approval. One of the numbers you'll find in those 80 to 100 pages is 45%. Anybody have a guess as to what that 45% would apply to? Okay, it does apply to one of the questions that we've asked in the past. And what it is 45% of the people that we talk to rated the overall state of the local economy in Lewis County is either excellent or good. All right, so if you look at that number, you might have a question, well, am I satisfied with that 45%? What does that 45% really mean? Obviously, it's not quite a majority. It's close to a majority. It's just under half of the people we talk to. But again, how does it relate? So again, what we're going to do here is we're going to talk about different ways that we might look at that 45% and get an idea of what that 45% means. So we've got 6 different ways that we typically look at a statistic that's been calculated from a sample and interpret that in a bunch of different ways. I might look at the 45% and I might have different ways that I might look at it from a good point of view, and I have other ways that I can frame it in a poor point of view. So the idea within the response scale, we see that 45% of the people rated it as either excellent or good. Well, what did the other 55% of the people say? Okay. If they rated it poor, that's different if they rated it don't know. If 45% of the people rated it positively and everybody else said don't know, that's different than if it was 45, good or bad, so on and so forth. How's the 45% this year compare to last year? Okay. Is it higher? Is it lower? How does that 45% compare to what we find in Jefferson County or St. Lawrence County? How does that 45% compare to the percentages from the other 10 variables that are asked on the same scale that we look at each year? Okay. Maybe you have a target or benchmark. There's a particular number that we're looking to hit. If your target was 50% and you hit 45, you came up short. If your target was 25%, you well exceeded what that number is going to be. And again, the idea of that 45%, is it 45% across the board, or is there a difference in opinion based upon gender or education or age or one of those types of things? So again, we'll take a look at it. Here's the idea of framing the first one. You can see that if you take those top 2 numbers, the 2.3 and the 2.6, there's your 45%. You can see where the other 55% fell. You can see it didn't all fall in the don't know. If you see 20% of them fell into the poor. So if you look, that's a ratio of a little more than 2 to 1. For every one person who rates the overall state of the local economy in a negative light, there are more than 2 people who rate it positively. So you can see for every 1 negative opinion, there's more than 2 positive opinions. So you can get an idea of, yeah, that's pretty good. We have a more positive view rather than a negative view. How does that 45 compare to in the past? And if you look at that line graph over on the left, you can see that that 45% is the highest it's been since we started tracking this back in 2007. Okay, so you can see it's an increase of last year. Last year it looks like it was about, I don't know if I had to guess, probably about 38%. So it's about a 6 or 7 point jump from where it was last year. And if you look, only 3 other times prior to this year was it even above 30%. Okay. You can also see in that line graph that the poor and the fair responses have also gone down at the same time. But if you look over on the right, the 45%, how does that compare? Look at how the 45% compares to the 16% in St. Lawrence County. Okay, it's almost 3 times as high, or it's 2.5 times as high in Lewis County than it is in St. Lawrence County. Not quite as high, though it is higher in Jefferson County than in Jefferson County. Okay, so you get the idea of the regional comparison there. Okay, let's see.
That was just focusing on subscripts.
Okay, so again, this is one, we'll talk about this a little bit because you guys have the report in front of you. A comparison of the counties. We could see from the graph that there's a big difference between the 45% in York County and the 16% over in St. Lawrence County. What you'll find is, in addition to the graphs and the full report, we give a table of the exact results of the nearest 10th. And what you'll notice is, if you look at the subscript on that 16.1% for St. Lawrence County, you've got a lowercase b. You've got a 45% on Lewis County as a C, and in Jefferson County you have a 35.6 with an A. Each time the subscript changes, it tells you that there is a statistically significantly large enough difference. So again, this being a B and this being a C tells us that that gap is large enough. Again, the idea that it's much larger than you expect if you did that plus or minus 4. If you do the plus or minus 4, the 16% for St. Lawrence County is between 12 and 20. The 45% for Lewis is between 41 and 65. There's still that big gap there. Okay, so again, this just will go through and it will actually tell you whether the difference between them. Basically what it does, it allows you to not have to worry about the plus or minus 4%. It kind of looks at that for you. So you just look, if the subscript's different, you can simply say that there is a difference between those numbers. Okay. Let's see the relative standing. Okay, so what we'll find is these are the top 4 positively rated of the 11 indicators that we chose to look at this year. You'll notice that the one we just looked at, the idea of overall state of the local economy is not here, but what you can see is quality of environment is the top rated issue this year. Overall quality of life is the 2nd highest, and so on and so forth. And what you can also see is you can also see a little bit of a trend at the same time. You can see that quality of environment is 88% this year, which is a slight increase over the last couple of years. You can see that with overall quality of life, a little bit of an increase from last year, a little bit down from 2 years ago. So you can get that slight idea there as well. If we go to the other end of the scale, we can kind of take a look and see what's happening on the negative side. So again, this is the top 4 negatively perceived issues that we looked at. And again, you can kind of take a look at access to higher ed was the lowest when you look at, is that percent poor, Joel?
Yeah, but it's the worst is on the left.
Oh, the worst on, okay, all right, so the worst is on the left, okay. So you can see availability of good jobs was the highest, okay, at 32%. But if you look at it from another point of view, it was 43% 2 years ago, and it's actually dropped by 11% over the last couple of years. Okay, so you can kind of get an idea there as well. Again, the last one that, again, Joel pointed this out a little bit before, we can look, is there a difference in opinion based upon some of these demographic pieces of information that we collect? Is there a difference in opinion about the overall state and local economy when it comes to gender? And if you take a look, the males and the females, looking at the numbers there, you can see that males have a more positive light about the overall state and local economy than females do, because you can see the difference in the subscripts when it comes to the good part. Okay. If you look at household income, do we see a difference there? You see some. What you'll notice here is you have some A's and B's, which says they're not different from the A's, they're not different from the B's. So if you look, I've got an A over here on the lowest income range. I've got a B over here, not on the highest one, but on the second highest. You can see that there's a big difference between those two values. Let's see, a couple additional track qualities that we noticed interesting facts about. Okay, so availability of good jobs, we just saw that that was one of the more negatively perceived items. It was the most negatively perceived item. But if I want to spin that a little bit differently, look at it from another point of view, take a look at that excellent or good rating. Okay, the excellent or good rating is 26%. That's, again, the highest that we've seen since 2007. So even though it was the most negatively perceived of the 11 issues, it is improving from where it's been the last few years and where it's actually been over the entire time we've looked at the study. Okay? All right. So you can see county comparison, very similar excellent or good rates between Jefferson and Lewis County, much lower rate up in St. Lawrence County. Access to higher ed. Okay, so if we look at access to higher education, that was also in one of the more negatively perceived items. Again, if you take a look here, not a big change, a slight drop in the excellent or good, pretty consistent over the last 4 years when we look at excellent or good. Pretty consistent in the excellent or poor, a little bit of a dip and then a little bit of a rise there. The interesting thing here would be the county comparison. Take a look. Jefferson and St. Lawrence County very similar at 74 and 75. Yours a little bit lower. Not unexpected due to the access that they have based upon the colleges being here. Part of the reason I think Joel picked this one is with the new higher ed center, maybe the number changes next year. This is one that will be interesting to look at next year. Does that number stay at 46% or does it bump up because of the new education? So again, the idea that, interesting, a change is made in the area. What are we going to see when we look at this a year from now? Personal financial situation. So if you look at personal financial situation, for the second year in a row, what we've seen is that people were more likely to indicate that things have gotten better over the last 12 months rather than gotten worse. Okay, last year was the first time that we ever saw a higher, better rating than a worse rating. We're seeing it a second time and for the second time. So again, positive when we look at it from that point of view. But if we look at the county comparison, 19% better rate is much lower than the other two counties when you look at it from a county comparison. So it's interesting how when you look at a single number and look at different ways you can frame it, in one light it's a positive and one it's not so positive. So I think, Joel, this is your spot.
We're doing awesome for time, so we're going to make it. What you just saw is we have 11 tracked community indicators over time, and we picked 3 or 4 of them right there to talk to you about. Because we know we have a brief time, we don't have a half a day. And we wanted to carve out time for, I was talking about Dr. Halpin. Dr. Halpin, for about the last 3 years, our board of directors at the Center for Community Studies have sent to Larry and I, you never have a question on there about the things that we talk about at our kitchen table, about the things we talk about when we're at the bowling alley, about the things that we talk about when we're with our friends and community members and family. And so what we did is it took about 3 years before we finally said we're going to design and take a look at, from the perspective of learning about our community, 11 different items. Now we wrote a master list that has over 20 of them, but we weren't going to add 20 more questions to the survey because we can't keep you on the phone for that long. So we carved it into 2 groups of 10, and this year that my 10 became 11. But we asked 11 questions that were not on an excellent, good, fair, poor scale. They were not on a yes-no scale. What we did is we used an approach and survey methodology that would be forcing a choice. So this is what Cody said on the phone. Next, we're interested in learning more about the opinions of residents of the county. For several issues, I'm going to read you two statements. I'll call them Statement A and Statement B. And for each, I'm interested in which you agree with, A or B. Now, technically, behind the scenes, we probe for intensity. If they said Statement A, then we said, do you strongly or somewhat? So there really was a 5-point scale. There was a strongly A, somewhat A, neither, no preference, somewhat B, or strongly B. So I grabbed, this is the first one. I grabbed it for no other reason other than this is the first one. In our classes, at our board meetings, with many emails, we wordsmith these things. I cannot tell you we are perfect. But what I can tell you is we've established something what we can now measure as a metric. So the United States needs to maintain its strong leadership role in the world political and economic order. That's A. The United States needs to refocus its attention on our own people and problems and let the rest of the world take care of itself. If we had more time today, I would love to make every single person sitting in this room read these statements and predict for me what the percents are that were the dominant one. I will tell you, these are the other 10. We asked 2 statements about the Me Too movement, about same-sex relationships, about pro-life versus pro-choice, about gun control versus gun rights, about federal income taxes benefiting the extremely rich versus benefiting all of us, about climate change, complete speculation and exaggeration versus proven scientific fact, about responsibility for health care. Should it be government provided? Should it be individual provided? About presidential approval. You heard me mention that one. We changed one word in the 2 statements. Overall, President Trump has been good for the country. Overall, President Trump has been bad for the country. Supreme Court appointments. Should they be dictated by the party in control? Or should they be neutral and nonpartisan? And Social Security funding. Should it be privatized or should it be left alone? So what I will tell you is every one of these 11, none of them were a dead heat. Not a single one of them was it a dead heat plus or minus 4%. Every single one of them, there was a dominant opinion in Lewis County. That's where I'd love to have each one of you write down your predictions of what do you think it was, but rather than holding you hostage, let me show. Now I want you to know that all I did is put them, there they are, all in one page with, the show's better than I thought it would, Larry. Mm-hmm. So let me just hit right there, same-sex relationships. One statement was, it's wrong for adults to be romantically involved with other adults of the same sex. The other statement was, it's perfectly all right for adults to be romantically involved with adults of the other sex. 63% chose this one, 30% chose that one. To come from Larry, that's a 2-to-1 ratio, right there it is. We calculated all the ratios. People are 7 times more likely to say, 84% said that Supreme Court appointments should be neutral and not reflect the political beliefs of the party in power. Only 11% said it should reflect the beliefs of the party in power. So what you should be dying after what Larry just taught you, you should be wondering, is that 84% going to be, is it 84% of the men? Is it 84% of the women? Is it 84% amongst the conservatives? Is it uniformly across all the subgroups, 84%? Or are there key correlations in there? So what I did in this table is sort them by the one that was the most dominant opinion. Look at the one at the bottom. That was the one that was least dominant. The United States needs to maintain its strong leadership role, the one I was just talking about. The United States needs to let the rest of the world take care of itself. Even 51-38, that was the closest, plus or minus 4%, plus or minus 4%. It still was a statistically significant domination. So that's a bunch of words and that's a bunch of numbers. So what we decided to do is put them as a graph. Would you have written down on your sheet of paper that you would have thought that your county neighbors would have said that Supreme Court appointments should be not party affiliated, or you think they would have said party in power? Clearly, by an almost 8-to-1 ratio, 7.3 or whatever it was to 1, the people are vastly supportive of let it be party neutral. Social Security funding. Leave it as is, 74% of the people said that. 20% said privatize. Do realize that I've already let one of the cats out of the bag by saying the presidential approval rate was 61% for President Trump. Do realize, I hope this makes sense and make me restate it if it doesn't. If 61% said they were pro-President Trump and it's only 20% that said privatize, that means there's at least 41% that said I'm pro-Trump, but I don't hold that view of privatizing Social Security. That's what was most interesting to us out of this. And I don't know if any of you caught what was published yesterday about Jefferson County next door in the Atlantic, but they were talking about the same idea of, is it political prejudice? Is it that once you stand on, I'm going to go red on one thing, I'm going to stay red on every bit of the platform? Or is it that in Northern New York here, we have a society and a group of community members where I believe we have evidence here that there is no question. Let me click further ahead and show you right there it is, 61 to 32. But obviously not every one of that 61% said privatize Social Security. That's what jumped out at us as researchers in here. So let me go back, and at any point in time, if you want to, I can dig more deeply into, like, what do the older folks think about Social Security versus the younger folks? What do the highly educated think versus the not so highly educated? But I gave you the report, and it's right in front of you, and on your own time, you can hopefully dig in. So, responsibility for health care, more than a 2-to-1 ratio. If you want to know the exact statements, then of course I can go back here and say the statements are: societal responsibility in government should ensure that good health care is available for all people. It's an individual responsibility, and government should stay out of it. You can see 26% versus 59%. Basically, pro-gun rights, the idea of the Second Amendment being sacred and New York State SAFE Act going too far, versus pro-gun control. You'd have to go back and see the exact statements. I don't know that that one would have shocked you. So there's one that 61% of the people did say that. Notice I intentionally did not turn them red nor blue because I'm not sure that I am the expert to say which is red and which is blue. When we asked, it's perfectly all right versus it's morally wrong, by a 2-to-1 ratio, people said same-sex relationships are romantically involved, you saw the phrases, are okay. Climate change. One statement was, it's exaggerated speculation, this whole thing about climate change. The other statement was, it's proven scientific fact. Again, that is clearly a statistically significant difference. And then, I already talked about the President Trump, good or bad. If you want me to read the exact statements, I can go back a couple slides, but you can see it's a woman's right versus it's morally wrong. The two statements were, choosing abortion is a woman's right and the society should protect that right. Abortion is morally wrong and society should prohibit it. Those are the two different bars you saw on the graph. What I would say is these are 11 indicators that do not all go in that same compartment. And I don't see that as inconsistent with what I saw the folks from Washington, D.C. talking about upstate New York yesterday. And I had no heads up on that. I got a text from my daughter's best friend who's in law school at the University of Virginia now, that it came across her Twitter feed. And she texted me and said, Mr. LaLone, did they talk to you? And I said, I don't know what this is, yesterday at about 2 o'clock. Then I went and grabbed Larry and said, Larry, you got to see this. And I said, this is interestingly, ironically, coincidentally, but consistently, in my mind, coming up with, it's a different county. They talked all about Jefferson County in that article. But did anybody other than Larry and I go on that Atlantic article yesterday and click on the source article that showed the map?
Yeah, we were in the top 1%.
He did. I am proud of both of you. Jefferson County was in the 3rd percentile. So that's good. 97% of the people, according to them, they say are 97% of the counties have less political prejudice than we do. But guess what? If they would have slid their cursor to the right, to you guys, you're in the top 1%. I don't know why they chose to interview all those folks they did in Watertown to make a big deal and not interview you folks in Lewis County. They both rated very highly on that. Now, I don't know the real methodology, so I can't assess the validity of it, but what I can tell you is this. I see it as in agreement with what we had found by surveying 426 of you folks last fall. Kind of missed on that one. So did I hit the Me Too movement? No, this is greatly exaggerated experiences of a few women. This is long overdue. That's what people said in your county. Again, plus or minus 4. And then the one that was closest to being a dead heat was that one on globalism versus nationalism. You can see we could spend hours digging deeply into the weeds with this. And all I did is spend, and I'm going to go fast through these slides, I couldn't help but wonder. are the people who are pro President Trump, do they also tend to be the people who are pro or against some statement, other statement A and statement B? So what we do, and Cody as my witness, what I teach in class every day is this. Now don't get scared about it. This is a correlation matrix that took every question and correlated it opposite every other question. And all I want you to know is a correlation is a number between 1 and -1, that the further it is out toward 1, or the further it is toward -1, it measures strength of relationship. I just highlighted the biggest one out of there. Presidential approval, your attitudes about gun control and rights. Those were the two most closely linked variables. That if you tended to say that I am pro-gun control, then you tended to say President Trump is not so good for our country, and the vice versa. I don't know that that would shock you that that comes out. There's the weakest one. The weakest one is, it doesn't matter what you think about gun control or gun rights, virtually everyone is saying Social Security, leave it as is. Those two are not linked. So I am going to go really fast and just show you that that's what a scatter plot, if I plotted it, look like. That would be an R of way out by 1. That's saying no relationship at all between two variables that we measured on streams in northern New York. That's a correlation very close to 0. That's one that is almost perfectly linear. That's a correlation that's very close to 1. And so when you go back to that matrix, you'd be looking for which of these are strong by 1 and which of them are weak down by 0. If someone wanted to know what attitudes tend to be strongly correlated with other attitudes. Another way to look at it is what Larry was talking about. This is looking at Social Security funding. Follow my red dot, please. It doesn't matter whether you're male, female, low income, middle income, high income, young, older, less educated, highly educated, conservative, middle of the road, liberal. It doesn't matter what your profile is. Virtually everyone has about a 70% chance of saying, we think you should leave it as is. That's Exhibit A of the definition of two variables that are not strongly correlated. Notice, it's what you think about Social Security and all of those different demographics. So here's one, President Trump, good or bad. Now I'm starting to see hopping in that. Hopping is not a scientific term. But what I see is once you get to the higher income, they're less likely to be President Trump is good for the country. Look at that. He is extremely popular in your county amongst the younger group. He's extremely popular amongst those people who are not the higher education levels. And my God, what would our sampling be if this wasn't the case? If you self-identify as conservative, there's 86% chance you say he's good. If you self-identify as liberal, there's an 81% chance you say he's not good. So therefore, that shows you that these two variables over here are related. And I am going to skip that slide and hand it over to Larry, because the end of it is the questions that you asked us to ask. And we only have 7 minutes left, and I don't want to ignore the idea of ATV trails, pedestrian trails, and the things that Larry's going to talk about. I gave you a little time.
So again, as Joel said, these are the questions that you guys as a county supplied to us. So again, what you can see is you can see a summary of 4 of the different questions that we asked. So we said, in the villages and towns throughout Lewis County, which of the following 4 types of improvements would you like to see in community assets? And what we did is we listed all 4 of them and said, would you like to see the improvement, yes or no? What you can see is, with the exception of downtown parking improvement, you can see a pretty big difference between the yeses and the no's. So 3 of those 4 things: community park improvement, improve main streets, improve water and wastewater systems, definitely more support than opposition. If you look at downtown parking, very similar in terms of the yes or the no. Again, the biggest thing I would point out here is the biggest differences between improved water and wastewater systems. It's about a 2-to-1 ratio. Some of the other ones are a little bit closer, more like 1.5.
We asked them if they wanted their water and sewer bills to go up or not.
We did not ask them anything about costs. We just said, do you want them to be improved? Again, after we asked these 4 things, we said, would you like to see them improved, yes or no? We asked them another question and said, if you could only pick one, what is the most important? When you look at the most important, you can see by a clear margin that the one that they pick as being most important is the improved water and wastewater system. You can see that category there is twice as large as the next closest one, which is improve the main streets. In addition, we said local governments are doing enough to improve their own community infrastructure. What you can see is It is a slight, it's not quite a majority if you do your ±4, but you can see people are more likely to indicate that yes, they are making improvements, local governments are making improvements rather than saying no, they're not. Oh, I went past one. Economic development initiatives. It says we gave them 4 different initiatives and said, do you support or oppose each of the following local economic development initiatives? Again, support is in blue, oppose is in green. Again, if you look at the bar graph, you can see very clearly each of these is getting a large level of support. If you look, let's see, the lowest one is that 68%, the highest one is 82, you got 82 and 81. Again, development of more public pedestrian walking trails, 82% say support, 13% say oppose. If you do that, that's about 6 to 1 ratio, a little more than 6 to 1. So for every one person who's in opposition, there are more than 6 people who are for that. And again, the next closest one, tourism and recreation related development, 81 to 13. Very similar if you look at those two. Again, there is overwhelming support for the other two as well, but you can see the biggest is, the biggest difference between opposition and support would be those two. Let's see. We were asked, what would you like us to do with the Climax building, or what would they like you to do with the Climax building? You can see by an overwhelming margin, they want you to split it up into smaller sections. Okay. 61% indicated that. The next closest is food processing center down 16%. It's almost a 4 to 1 ratio of the top choice to the second choice. And if you look, some of those others are much, much lower. Let's see, potential infrastructure investments. Lewis County government would like to know if the residents support or oppose the use of taxpayer funds to create the following 3 types of infrastructure needed for new business. So again, notice in this one, using taxpayer funds, so not necessarily raising taxes, at least it's the idea of using taxpayer funds. And again, the idea of support and oppose. You can see, if you go back similar to what we saw before, you can see the water systems. Okay. 87% to 9%, almost a 10 to 1 ratio if you look at support versus opposition. Again, the other two you definitely see the support, just you don't see quite the overwhelming support. Again, here you see a 7 to 2 or 3.5 to 1 ratio, so there's still support there. And again, you got 55, not quite a 2 to 1, so you do see that one as well. And again, Joel mentioned this very beginning, the idea of a couple of different positions. Would you like to see them appointed, or would you like to see them stay as elected? And what you can see is in both of these cases, they're opposed to changing to the appointment from the elected. They like to keep them elected 57 to 29, about a 2 to 1, keep it alone, leave it alone. 59 to 29, again, leave it alone, keep it the way it is. So there's not overwhelming support to change that from an elected position to an appointed. And we got through with 2 minutes to spare.
I have 3 things to say.
We found out now before he got his report done.
I have to say, and I'm going to blame Mr. Verkler for this. The last email I got from him said we're going to start at 4, so we built a PowerPoint deck thinking we were going to go for an hour. And we're trying to squish it into 45 minutes. That's one of the reasons why I skipped the slide. That green and red one I really want to go back to, but I won't. But I did want to say, again, Cody. We have a student here, Cody, and as much as we love to provide data for you, if somebody asked me to really prioritize when I get to the end of this career, what were the most gratifying things about doing this research, it's probably at the top of the list going to be the work that we've done with the students that have grown up in your community. So if you have a question for Cody, fire away. I told him be prepared, Cody, today. I didn't tell him he had to wear a tie, but is there anyone that has a question that from the student perspective, or not so much?
Could you tell if you were hitting landlines or cell phones? I mean,
Definitely,
my parents don't even have a landline anymore.
really.
I don't have a landline.
The majority, I think, was landlines.
Yeah.
We switched to cell phones and we were having trouble with getting people to pick up, or it was definitely the majority of these landlines.
It is. It's about 70% landlines, 30% cells. But in your county, that's still quite indicative. Now, when we do research in Monroe County in Rochester, then we're not going to do 70% landlines and 30% cells. It's going to be close to the reverse of that. So we're constantly tracking phone ownership. We're constantly tracking phone ownership in the areas that we're surveying because we want to get a representative sample. Anything else for Cody?
Did
Go ahead.
you know who you were talking to? Did you have any knowledge of who the number belonged to and stuff when you were calling?
I did. No, it was all random.
He's not supposed to. I was waiting for him to say. If he said yes, I thought, you really know everybody's phone number in Lewis County, Cody?
There was one time where I accidentally, it was the first time. I said my name on accident, and they ended up knowing me, but that was I didn't say it again after that. That
Cody's
was
a
it.
quick study. Did anybody get called last fall? All right, I have to. Ryan, I know you're interested in this, so I'm going to just impose it on everyone else. We used you as an experiment last fall as well. These 426 surveys were all done by landline telephone calls and cell phone telephone calls. But we found a supplier that we didn't know whether to believe it or not that sold me, I bought them, about, do you remember what it was? A little over 4,000
Yeah.
email addresses of residents of Lewis County. I bought it, not knowing whether what I was going to get was worth a darn or not. And so we blasted them. And of course, on that first day, about 1,000 of them come back as not valid email, not valid email. And then you got people like Ryan who have rpshay at AOL.com, rpshay at yahoo.com, rpshay at gmail.com, rpshay, come on, get just one email address. So did any of you get the email is my question.
I don't think so.
100 of you filled it out. So of course, what do researchers do? They say, what do we find as the results of what you think about President Trump, what you think about ATV trails, which by the way, it was on the slide, I forgot. What you think about the local state of the economy. He and I dug in to say, are we capturing it in a different group? We did not blend them in because they were very different. And the biggest issue that happened is we saw some results that when you put it in front of you on your laptop, and if you now don't have Cody talking to you on the phone, and you see strongly A, somewhat A, both, somewhat B, and strongly B, you know what happens? Oh, both. I think President Trump's been both good and bad. Oh, both. I think that strong leadership should be this. Oh, both. I think that, because we didn't offer the both on the phone. The whole theory of that methodology is to force a choice. And so Larry and I looked at it and said it really introduced a confound. It introduced a confound, but we're going to be blasting them to Jefferson County this spring because the fact of the matter is, at a certain point in time, our telephone methodology might become a little bit more dinosaur-ish. However, that said, 100 people filled it out from Lewis County online. Not one single person of those 100 was under the age of 40. You know how you get them? Call their cell phones. That's what we're doing. If you want to get them, you got to go get them in the right methodology. So we have fun with investigating this all of the time.
You guys asked a question about overall satisfaction with county government. Wasn't that one of them?
I'm pretty sure we said overall satisfaction with Ryan Pichet is what we said in there. But yeah, if you want to call it, yes, we've asked that one over time. Do you want me to open it up and look at it?
I think that would be interesting for these guys to see. Got it.
Yeah. So this is what you're going to do at home tonight when you're really bored to death. You're going to go to the table of contents, and then you're going to go find the page. And since I wrote this darn thing, I am scrolling up. Did you say page 15?
Table 15.
Table 15. So we're table 20. We try to be very systematic with you. And so when you get to table 15, what Ryan is alluding to is, please rate county government. So again, here's Larry's lesson to you right now that I haven't prepared for this. Larry's lesson is the first thing I do is I take a look at 44% of the people said excellent or good. And I go, okay, it's very, very stable. But I have no idea. How do you compare to St. Lawrence County, Ryan? And so what you can see is over time, it's essentially been roughly right around the 40% has said excellent or good. And what you can see is, look at that. That's better than either of the other two counties that we've gotten. So this is the way that you want to look at it. And if you ever need help on what's the best way to interpret or how would we interpret, at the end, that last slide, it's got our email addresses. And we do pick up our cell phones if you call. We'd be happy to work with you on that. So,
Joel, you realize that Ryan already knew the answer to that question. He wouldn't have
he
to.
was fishing, and I know it. But I know what he's like.
It's a good
I just play along with him because, this is his neck of the woods, not mine. But yeah, it is higher than the other two counties. There is no question when Larry does the presentation, we don't even swap roles in St. Lawrence County. He kind of goes solo doing this.
Yep.
Larry has the tough job because up in St. Lawrence County, there clearly is a lot less positive sentiment about the local economy, about their local government, about everything but access to higher education. You should see the results on the question about availability of shopping opportunities. There isn't a mall up there anymore. And then Larry has to somehow kind of spin it well with them. But it's really interesting to be able to do this. In fact, I have to say that Eric said to me before we started today, you ought to ask those 11 questions. I don't know why you picked North Dakota, but he said you ought to ask those 11 questions about the Me Too movement and climate change and so on in North Dakota. In South Dakota, I'm thinking if somebody wants to fund it, we can do those phone calls and we could do it. It's just we can't afford to just be going out and doing it all over the country. But wouldn't it be interesting to frame it in another geographic way? So the last thing I wanted to say, unless you had more questions because I kind of interrupted or Ryan interrupted or whatever for Cody, let me just tell you, let me just brag about Cody. Cody, as with every other student, at the end of the semester, he had to write a deliverable for me as a part of the class, to pass the class. So they dig in and they answer these questions just like this. So in theory, by the end of the course, they should be able to steal my job. And Cody wrote one that, didn't you dig in on the gun control, gun rights question? And basically what Cody did is he did what one of the pages in here is, but it's really interesting to see our students using the math formulas to answer various questions. And I can remember it wasn't hard for me to put an A at the top of that paper. So he did well on it. And the last thing always is we thank you for always welcoming us so much. And this is what keeps he and I enjoying the job so much at college. Unless you have other questions, we can bolt now.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. It's for having me. It's a pleasure. Well, thanks.
Thank you.
The ATV one was on there. I was glad when I saw it.
Great job. We love your numbers.
Well,
Next year we may